No. I can't hear you. You're still connecting, it looks like.
I'm sorry.
There you go. How are you?
There we go. Good. I was still trying to find all the buttons I had to push.
Yeah, no, I know. It's a pain in the butt with this stuff sometimes.
That it is. That it is. Hey there. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Are we starting right off on the interview or are we talking?
Okay, so I would love to just chat for a little bit.
That would be preferable for me.
Yeah, and then I'll give you some like specifics. If you have any questions, we can talk about stuff. But I've seen you around online in the groups and stuff, and glad that we finally get to meet.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've seen you in some of them too. I was like, that's a name I've seen repeatedly.
Well, the podcast stuff is one of the main things that I post about, but yeah. So sounds like you would do a lot of work with trauma.
Yeah, it's what my whole website, my whole practice is aimed at adults healing childhood trauma. It's my jam.
What like got you interested in that kind of work?
First, of course, my own trauma.
I mean, hey,
yeah.
we're all therapists for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Second, I was in my 20s and I was going to the University of New Hampshire, and I took my first psychology class, and I was like, but I also knew, because I'd already been and seen a couple of therapists, that there are some really bad therapists out there, and my impression was the really bad ones hadn't worked on their shit.
Yeah, no, for sure. Or kind of don't really grasp the idea of what we're doing exactly, you know?
So I was like, okay, I can't do this right now. So I put it on a back burner, and then I'm 35, 37, something like that. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm like, fuck, if I'm gonna do this, I need to do this. And then I'm like, fuck, I'm in debt.
You're telling me.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, how do I solve this? And I became a truck driver for 6 years. So put everything in storage, got a cell phone, my first cell phone, and spent 6 years over the road, getting out of debt, pulling together some money. Then I went to undergrad, finished my undergrad. It was. I have been in every state except for Alaska and Hawaii.
Wow.
And I have no desire to be in Alaska.
I can understand why. I would imagine driving a truck out there would be some challenges.
Yes, there would be. Yeah. And I also just don't like the cold. I do not
Yeah,
like the cold.
gotcha.
There's a reason I keep moving further and further and further south.
Where are you from originally?
New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And when was it that you got in Texas?
I settled in Texas when I stopped truck driving and went back to school. So 2008.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I am like Texas born and raised. Never lived anywhere else. I mean, I lived places throughout Texas, but never outside of Texas. And part of it for me is the cold and snow. And I just don't think I have it in me to like shovel the snow off my car in the driveway in the mornings. I'm just not that kind of person. So yeah. I've been sticking here, but I would love to live in like the desert someday. I love the desert.
Oh God,
it's beautiful.
I love the desert. Love the desert. Arizona, New Mexico, parts of California,
Nevada.
There's just yeah. Oh my God. Well, Nevada gets more barren. It's an area that's less
Nevada's
stuff.
Interesting. It's really interesting. Is that where Death Valley State Park is? Is it Nevada or is it?
No, I think that's California. I don't know.
Now I have to look it up. Because I will not be able to move on until I know. Let's see the website. Where are you? National Park, California, and Nevada. So it's both states.
There we go. We're both right. Yeah, and there's something about the desert in the way that it looks like it's dead until it rains, and then it just explodes, and it really resonates for me. Yeah,
no, I get it. It's like beautiful in its own like interesting, like super interesting way, because things that survive out there survive ridiculous conditions, Yeah.
It's definitely an analogy for trauma work there, right there.
Yeah, I could see that. So I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. I am a border kid. I grew up with the border of Mexico about 2 miles away from where I lived. Went to undergrad and grad school in San Antonio, double majored in psychology and criminal justice. Took my first intro to psychology course at the college level when I was 15. I just kind of always knew. I was just so interested, and I still am. It is one of my biggest interests, and a struggle for me is like figuring out what's work and what's pleasure, and finding the balance between the two.
Yeah, hold on one sec.
Sure.
I'm sitting here and I'm one of those people who can't not have socks on, and I just jumped out of the shower and I hadn't put socks on, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna die. I am absolutely gonna die.
That is a necessity. I actually have a weird thing about socks. I cannot wear new socks, which means over the years my sock stash has significantly dwindled. And so like most of my socks I've probably stolen from my friends and girlfriends and parents and family. Because I don't know, new socks just have such a weird texture to me.
Autism? Yeah,
I definitely am neurodivergent. Yeah, and I think that it's one of my favorite parts about myself, to be honest with you, because I think that's part of what helps me come up with good ideas like the podcast,
Yeah.
And I love this work. That's why I do this podcast. And it's also been a great way for me to like meet people during the pandemic when networking is more difficult. And like, it's just been a really great experience.
Yeah. I can see definitely where it was. This is very similar to something I had thought about, but just decided that I did not have the ADHD brain to put into it. My ADHD brain was like, no, you're not going to be that committed. You'll be one of those podcasts out there that has 2 episodes. And that's it.
Well, the good thing, uh, again, it's a double-edged sword. When I commit to something, like I fully commit to something, so I have to be careful to be choosy about what those things look like.
Yep. Yep. That means you're not one to do flippant agreements. You're
Right,
always kind of
right,
confidently think. That's like how I do promises. You know, I don't promise never to do something again. That seems stupid. I've got a lot of life left in me. I am human. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes between now and when I die. So for me, the idea of making such a broad promise is stupid. Now I'll make promises like I will promise to work on that harder.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll promise to
Totally.
do better. Those kinds
Yeah,
of things. But I won't make blanket ones because it's like those are made knowing you can't keep them.
right, right. Yeah. No, I totally feel that. Um, I know one thing that came up in the email was like gender and your own like journey with that, and like
Oh God, yeah.
just because of what I do, I'd love to know more if it's something you'd like to talk about.
I'm open to talking about it totally. You know, it started back forever ago. You know, I don't know when I didn't think of myself as a major tomboy, but a tomboy who read rather than played. I
Mhm.
read and read and read, and that's how I escaped my rather chaotic childhood. I was in fantasy books. Um, so it's like, and then I also as kind of like a part of my, because see, I can't pull up two apart and say which is my gender identity and my gender presentation and which is my trauma. I can't pull
Sure,
those
sure.
apart. So, you know, I developed a style of dress that was more or less fuck you and get away from me.
Fair enough. I've been there.
You know, which, you know, included things like I'd draw on my jeans every morning on the 35-minute bus ride to school. I'd draw axes and knives and stuff that would get you kicked out of school nowadays. But
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
80s and 90s, it did not. 80s, it did not get kicked out of school. You know, and that stomping walk kind of thing. Um, and then, you know, I'm in my 20s and God, my 20s, middle late 20s, and wrestling with and have been wrestling with forever my own sexual orientation. You know, that whole classic, okay, I think I like girls, but I'm not all those homophobic slur ideas of
Right,
what a dyke is, you
right,
know?
right. But
But that
there's
was
this
all I
whole thing I
had.
believe. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's like this is all I have for what a lesbian is. And I'm not that, but pretty, you know? So,
Totally.
but my best friend at the time, who was straight, said, Schawn, you need to get some education. And she took me to and I say the lesbian bar within an hour drive of our house, because this was rural New Hampshire in the 80s or 90s.
Heard.
Took me to, and it was a members only bar. So one of us had to become a member. So my scared, terrified little ass became a member. And I spent the next 2 weeks there practically every night, just like in my brain freaking out, you know, like, and then it just clicked. And I'm like, oh, okay, this fits. And I was totally okay with it. Now, my gender presentation, that's a progress that's happened over my
It's
whole
a
fucking
journey.
lifetime.
I think journey is the perfect word to describe that.
Mm-hmm.
And like the thing that cisgender people like don't understand, like people who never have to question that, they don't understand that the privileges is that they don't get, like they don't have to think about that. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like that's a privilege in and of itself. And
Mm-hmm.
tell me more though, like what happened, how things come about.
So, I mean, I kind of, because of my career, multiples of careers, I was reluctant. Well, I was never a polo person because I worked a lot of hourly wage jobs where you had a polo uniform shirt.
Uh-huh.
And I wear them now just because I put on so much weight that I had to throw away all my clothes or give away all my clothes. But for me, polos aren't dressing up. They're going to work. And they're going to work with a lot of negative stuff attached to it.
Uh-huh.
Hourly work just chews you up and spits you out.
For sure.
And but for the most part, it was t-shirt and jeans when I wasn't working. And that worked all the way up through forever. When I would go out with my girlfriend or go on a date or a really nice date or something like that, then it was something nicer, oftentimes a men's dress shirt, that kind of thing. It was actually when I came off the road from truck driving I hadn't finished my undergrad when I was in my 20s, because I knew kind of where I wanted to go, but I also knew it was a really fucking bad idea for me to do that right then. And so I had to go back and finish my undergrad first. So I went to Texas Women's University and got my undergrad there. And I was getting ready to go there. I was like, okay, how am I dressing? I was like, all right, I don't want to do t-shirts. So then it was men's dress shirts with the top button undone, no tie. And that was just my standard attire. And I got all kinds of cool dress shirts and nice things like that and loved it. And it felt right. And that's kind of the thing that clicks for me, is it just feels right when
that's what it's all about.
Yeah. And then when I went to grad school, and I was better dressed than most of my teachers. I mean, I had one classmate go, "Where do you work that you have to dress like that?" And I'm like, "I work at the library upstairs and I dress this way because I like it." And he's like, "Oh." But then I got so grad school is like, well, grad school's a step more than college. So it feels right for the attire to be a step more.
Right.
So I did dress shirts and ties, with the ties a little loose because I have a thing against that choking tightness.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah.
I can only wear a tie for a certain period of time, then I'm like, oh, get it off me.
See, I intentionally wear them in that kind of like post photograph time when everybody pulls their tie.
Yeah.
That's how I intentionally wear them.
Gotcha.
That's
a cool look.
Style. Yeah, exactly. And I have this great collection of ties. Like 60 ties. Just awesome. Lots of purple. That's my color. Just awesome. But this pandemic, I gained a great deal of weight. I am a boredom eater. And man, the pandemic was boring.
Yeah, I was actually having a conversation with my roommate the other day about how I don't remember like the first 6 months of the pandemic really, because it felt so monotonous and like there wasn't anything going on. Yeah.
So I gained so much weight that all my shirts didn't look good anymore. So I had to give them up to Salvation Army or the local version of that. And kind of just still trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do to get it right now. Because it's still, I'm doing polo shirts, but it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's a part of it. I think like when I say it's a journey, like it kind of almost doesn't end in that way, nor do I necessarily think it should, No. For me, I came out as a lesbian when I was 26. I was a little bit older, but I grew up in a very Mexican conservative Catholic area. And that was huge.
Is that like the Valley kind of thing?
Yeah.
Where is that?
So the very bottom of Texas.
The very, very like tip bottom?
Yep.
Because someone kept on saying I'm from the Valley, and I kept on thinking LA.
Gotcha. Yeah. A lot of people who aren't from Texas think that, which is funny. But yeah, it's the Rio Grande Valley.
Okay.
And there's like 4 or 5 counties at the very tip that line the bottom, like the very bottom border between Mexico and Texas.
Okay.
It's basically where you go to get to South Padre Island.
Never been to South Padre Island.
Oh, it's one of the best beaches in Texas.
Okay. Put it on the list then.
So yeah, I spent a few years exploring my sexuality as a lesbian, and something still didn't feel right. Like there was
Mm-hmm.
still something else going on, and I took time and I kind of explored my femininity initially, and that never felt right. And I started, I guess the word that you would use is I went in the soft butch direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
And then that didn't feel right. And then one day I had met a new friend who now is my very best friend in the whole world. We've been best friends for like 7 years now. She's awesome. She asked me one day, how do you identify? And I was like, oh.
Kind of like my straight friend taking me to the club,
Right,
it's
right.
like,
Yeah.
wait, what? Yeah.
And it just, everything just clicked. And that was approximately 5 years ago. Well, actually, it was a little over 5 years ago. I just had my 5-year anniversary on testosterone on Monday of this week. So, I did it definitely when I was much older. I'm 37 now. I was about 31, 32 when I started. And I'm so glad I did it. I feel like I have perspectives that people who don't go through this could never possibly understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that totally.
Like, as living my life as a woman at the time, I knew that things like male privilege existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really understand how male privilege worked until it happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, that in and of itself blows my mind. Like these things that women live with all the time, and have no
Mm-hmm.
idea how different it is on the other side of
Mm-hmm.
that. um it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've loved every second of it. The phrase that I use to describe myself is a non-binary trans man, because if you really want to get specific about it, my gender presentation is male, right? Like, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
through and through. And I love playing with masculinity and like masking it up and putting on some
Mm-hmm.
steel toe work boots and like work shirts. I love that shit. But I also really enjoy doing things like wearing nail polish. And it wasn't until I transitioned that I became comfortable with my femininity. And
Mm.
so, one thing that I've come to realize about myself over the last 5 years is that, my gender presentation is male, but my gender identity, the way that I feel about my gender, the word that I would use for that is bigender, because I really do feel like I'm a combination of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That kind of, finding your spot. I often talk about how you'll see lesbians in a lot of male work fields. And I think the reason is because once we have to figure out our sexual orientation and kind of break out of those spaces, and go in a new direction, then doing that in other places doesn't feel so impossible. It's like, oh, drive a truck? Yeah, sure. I can do that.
Yeah,
Again.
yeah. No, I get that. And you know what? I have extreme respect for everybody in the LGBTQIA plus community, but I just have such a special place in my heart for butch women. You know, like, I don't know why I think it's just so badass. Like, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And it, I don't know. I think it's because of like my own personal ties, my history of my own personal ties to that sort of identity, and
Mm-hmm.
like kind of understanding a lot of the fuck you involved with it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and I don't know, it's just, I love it. It's so empowering, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I am right there with you. Sorry, my brain just clicked off. Hold on a second.
But one thing I do want to be sure to say is that, like, my heart goes out to women because I know what women struggle with because I've been there, and being on the opposite end of that, like I see all the ridiculous inequities and pressures that are put on women. And so I just have like a special place in my heart, period, for any sort of like woman identified or femme identified person.
Yeah, those people in those categories. It's like it's easy from the place wherever you happen to be born sitting to not see the difference.
Right.
But sometimes when you run into things like your sexual orientation doesn't fit the norm, or your gender presentation doesn't fit the norm, or your gender needs to adjust to fit you, whatever those things are, it gives you this opportunity. You know, and unfortunately, not everybody takes the opportunity. If they did, then the gay community would not be racist.
Right. Good point.
You know, but it's an opportunity for us to apply what we come to understand about ourselves outward.
Right.
You know, and the awareness of inequity that we become aware of for ourselves outward. Right. You know, and I think, you know, having those opportunities is awesome. And I often feel very disappointed in, you know, the queer community for its homophobia. I mean, for its biphobia, and for its transphobia, and for its racism, and for its all these things. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, folks, why don't you understand this?
No, I totally agree. I have always taken issue with that. It's really unfortunate that a lot of people within the community aren't even familiar with like their brothers and sisters within the community. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't know.
They want to claim Stonewall, but not own the fact that it was started by trans Black people.
Trans women, yeah. Trans Black women.
Trans Black women.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, hey, I had one thought.
Sure.
In terms of the questions. Sorry, I want to,
please.
My brain gets a little scattered at times. If you ask me about what clients expect at the first session, earlier, like right after number 9, which is before all the specific stuff.
So after, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Or I've got number 9 as what modalities do you draw upon?
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you meant before or after.
After.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
And the reason for that is because then I'll tell you that the first time they meet me actually isn't the first session, it's the consult.
Okay.
Because I do a 30-minute in-person consult.
Okay.
And that will lead into, okay, what happens during the consult and that kind of thing. And that will kind of take us through a lot of this stuff in here.
All right, get that written down. Done and done. Anything else?
Nope.
What were your thoughts in general on the questions?
Thought they were great. Thought they are great. Yeah.
Okay.
The problem's going to be that I can talk forever. Because once you get me into like my theories around this stuff and the stuff I'd like to tell my clients about, you know, like what's so unique about childhood trauma compared to adult trauma, and you know, all that kind of stuff and those kind of things, I can just go off, you know, and you might be having to edit the hell out of this.
Note to Amanda, she's my sound engineer, and actually she's going to be joining me. This is the last podcast that I'm doing. Yeah, I'm doing this last one individually, and then starting next month, Amanda will be joining me, and I'm looking forward to that.
Really weird question, because she's a sound engineer, right? And does like shows and stuff.
Yeah.
Does she wear her belt backwards?
I don't know. That's a good question. I
I
could
was at a
see. Okay, go ahead.
I was at a training for the local area therapist group, psychotherapy group. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but they had a day-long or 2-day-long training seminar in Austin because they're based in Austin. And we had a sound engineer, and it was a lady. I don't remember what the name is, but they wore their belt backwards because bending over and picking up shit was painful with the big belt buckle.
That
And they
makes
had
sense. Yeah.
a big train belt buckle. And they told me that if I was at a bar and I asked them why they did that, they would charge me $20 because drunk men will pay $20 to find out why.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, I know Amanda, she mainly works in the music scene. I know she's done a lot of work at Stubbs and various other venues downtown. So I know she ran sound for like ACL. She's into like the big shit. It's possible she could have done some of that too, but I haven't known her to take up contract work like that recently.
Totally cool. There's just, from my impression of my running into the field, it feels pretty male dominated. So
it is. And
I wonder if I happen to have run into her.
She would love to talk to you about that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, are there any questions you have for me before we get started and move forward today?
No, I'm ready. How
All right.
Does it sound okay? Sound good?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good.
So I'm going to go over a few recording things after I cough. I have a tickle in my throat. I was out fishing and it was windy earlier. That could be a result of that. So if you need to take a break, and I mean, it could be a break for any reason, especially like if you need to go to the bathroom, please don't just hold it, like please. Or if you say something you don't like and want to like start over again, just put your finger up like this, and this will signal to me to stop talking, and you stop talking, and that just gives Amanda an easier place to splice in the audio.
Gotcha.
And so anything can be edited out. I like to give folks till Saturday at noon to let me know if there's anything specific, like if you wake up in the middle of the night and just sheer panic.
Oh my God,
horror.
why did I say that?
Right. Just send me an email by noon tomorrow and let me know, and I'll let Amanda know what she needs to do. What else? So the podcast will likely be posted on Monday morning because I have found myself to be a little lazy on Sunday evenings recently. So I just kind of like rolling it in with my workday when I sit down at the computer on Monday morning. I will send you an email as soon as I post it. The email will have like information about all the places it can be found, requesting some of your feedback. There will be a link to a Google form. I would love if you would give me just some feedback about the show. I'm actually a little disappointed because I sent this Google form to everybody that has been on the podcast previously. So at the time, I think it was like 47 or 48 people. And,
wow.
And the people that I've interviewed so far this season, and only 8 people have responded. And and that kind of hurts my feelings a little bit, to be honest, because you know, I'm trying to do like to make things better, and I put my time and money into this podcast. You know, just please fill out the feedback form. That's all I ask. And there's also information on donating. The podcast was recently on KUT, and some of the numbers in the podcast have been going up recently. In season 6, I will be expanding to the state of Texas as a whole. And part of that is in hopes of like getting a little more visibility so people know that it's a resource out there for them to use. And so I'm looking at different ways to go about marketing that. Anything else? Oh, in the email, I will also email you the MP3 for the finalized episode. So you can have that. You can do what you want with it. Post it on your website, post it on YouTube, or you can just link to what I have posted on YouTube or, whatever. No video will be used. I like the video for connecting with people. Just the audio is used for the podcasts. Even when I post on YouTube, doesn't have the video; it just has like an image of the logo. Anything else you're curious about or think would be helpful to know?
No. Hold on a sec. Oh. So would you mind if letting me have the video? Because there's aspects that I would like to put on my, if I get a good run through of the parts where I'm
while you're speaking?
Yeah,
you could do that. That's fine. I would just have to, I would probably want to edit out the beginning and ends. That way it's just the middle, our conversation at the beginning. That way that's not included in. So let me actually put that on my to-do list now because I will forget.
because I keep on trying to create my own video of a couple of the concepts that I like to talk about with people when I first meet them and stuff, so that people can have a better idea about this stuff. Problem is I don't have the same amount of energy just talking with myself that I get when I'm talking with someone.
Right. Yeah, I feel that. Another thing that I highly recommend is, and I've used the podcast with my clients in a variety of ways. I've used the podcast to introduce my clients to different topics and get information like on attachment, EMDR,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all of it, So I do encourage you to let clients know, you can use it and integrate it into your, giving clients homework, hey, check this out. Let's talk about it next week.
Yeah, I send clients who want in-depth understanding of attachment styles to Therapist Uncensored all the time.
Oh, yeah. And then another good way to use the podcast, your episode specifically, will be for onboarding new clients. So, you can say, hey, go over and listen to this podcast. So give you some information about how I work,
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I was doing. I am too easily distracted. Video and email to Schawn. Okay. Now let me save it because sometimes I've made that mistake, which is awful because then I have to try and go back and remember all the things I just forgot again. Okay, so what I'm going to do, any other questions, concerns, comments, etc.?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, cool. So what I am going to do is I'm going to introduce you, read the intro, and then we will jump right into the questions. And like I said, if you want to pause at any time, just put your finger up. And then we'll chat a little bit after the podcast that way I can get your thoughts on if there's anything immediate that comes to mind about needing to be edited. And then just kind of, figure it out from there.
Sounds good.
Hopefully I don't mess up the intro. Sometimes I get tongue-tied.
That happens.
I keep telling Amanda we need to come up with a blooper reel. All right, here we go. Hello, and welcome to NextQuest podcast, where I ask your potential therapist questions so you don't have to. I am your host, Noah S. Garcia, licensed professional counselor supervisor. Today, I welcome to the show Schawn Austin, licensed professional counselor, who will be speaking about her practice in an area of clinical focus, adults healing from childhood trauma. Welcome to the show, Schawn.
Thank you. Looking happy to be here. This is exciting. Never been interviewed before.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Like we had talked about earlier, I've seen your name here and there, and I've seen it come up. And I was hoping eventually our paths would cross, and here we are.
Yep. That it did. You put out a request for therapists who are willing to be interviewed. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that.
I love it. And thank you for volunteering for this. So
Yeah.
to get us started, what are your credentials and experience?
So I am a licensed professional counselor. I have my master's in counseling. I've been doing this for about, if you count, about 5 years, including when I was a licensed intern. About a year and a half fully licensed as of right now. But as soon as I started grad school, I started focusing my training on working with adults with trauma. So every class I was taking, I was like, does that apply? Does that apply? Can that help? How can I turn this way? Can I write a paper about this to make it more accurate towards what I want to be doing? I was always aiming it that way as much as I could.
Yeah. Yeah. So congratulations on getting fully licensed a year and a half ago, by the way. It's a huge accomplishment. I think that we get put through an inordinate amount of stress during our internships, associateships, whatever they're called now.
Yeah.
So Schawn, what is the name of your practice?
So my practice is healing history counseling.
Okay, cool. Now, at your practice, do you accept insurance? If so, which ones? If not, why not?
I do not accept insurance, primarily because they want you to jump through lots of hoops and then pay you less.
Yep.
And if I'm going to get less money, I'm going to do it with no hoops.
I'm right there with you. That's why I made the move to private pay.
Yeah. So I am actually right now in the process of working with a company called Advocate, who will process for my clients their out-of-network paperwork.
Ooh.
So I get paid upfront. They only have to pay for what Advocate thinks is their portion. And then Advocate waits for the money to come from the insurance company.
I gotta look into that. That's interesting. I've always been curious about how people who like regularly help clients with out of network reimbursement. I've always been curious how people go about that.
Yeah, I don't understand it really well myself, but we're starting that now. I've got like one more conference with them and then I'm up and running.
Cool. So I would imagine, that you probably have a sliding scale or reduced fee structure.
Yes, I do. I firm believer that there is a very strong connection between having childhood trauma and being in poverty.
For sure.
I work a sliding fee scale in the way of, I don't know if I'd call it honor system. It's just more like what I say to my clients is, I don't want to dig into your finances. I don't think that builds a relationship. So what I have done is I have figured out as low as I can go and still be present in the room and be fully focused on our work. And that lowest number for me is $80 a session. Mm-hmm. What I say is between that fee and my full fee, I want you to find where you can go in there and still come every week, because trauma work is slow, hard work, period. Never mind if you try and go every other week or every once a month, then it just stalls and stops.
Yeah.
So I also run, I keep 2 slots open for open path. Mm-hmm. And I do one client through the queer teen group, Out Youth or.
Oh, yeah. Out Youth.
Yep. So I see one of their overflow clients.
Cool. Very cool. Now, do you have weekend or evening appointments available?
Yes to both. Evenings can be a bit hard because everybody wants evenings. But I see clients on Tuesday and Thursday by video, which I guess is your next question, and Wednesday and Saturday in person. And I'm not a morning person, so you can't get a scheduled appointment before 10 a.m. And I'd prefer 11.
I am the exact same way, but I cannot be a functional person before 10 a.m., and I just am a much better therapist after 10 a.m. with some coffee.
Yes. Yep. I don't mind getting up before 10 a.m. I have no problem with that, but I want to sit on my couch
Yes.
and pet my puppy dog and drink my coffee and be lazy for an extended period of time.
I am the same way. I wake up at 7:30. Monday, I start at 10. And the rest of the week, I start at 11 or 12. So.
Yep. I'm not a morning person. I'm not going to happen.
So it sounds like you're doing both telehealth and in person.
Yes, I am.
Okay, cool. Do you plan to kind of stay half and half, or do you know what things are going to look like moving forward?
I'm probably going to stay half and half because I'm also in the process of getting my California license.
Cool.
That's primarily because Texas feels a little crazy right now. And I figured a backup plan would be a good idea.
Heard.
And a number of clients have left Texas and gone to California. So I was like, well, if I have a California license, both A, I'll have a backup plan, and B, these clients that keep going to California, I won't have to stop working with. So.
Yeah, I have plans at some point. It's on my long-term to-do list, but I want to get licensed in Oregon, Colorado, and Washington.
Yep. I don't think I could do any of those states because of either rain or cold.
True. Now, I really would love for our listeners to hear this story, just, knowing a little bit from what we talked about earlier, for our audience. Is being a therapist your first career? If not, what was, and what have you been up
to? Oh my God, no, it's not my first career. So I am a year and a half into being fully licensed and I am 50. Not my first career at all. My very first career would probably be my parents' pottery business when I was a kid. From there, it was a variety of health-related hourly jobs, and then a lot of retail-related hourly jobs until I figured out that I needed to go back to school. I was like, okay, I'm never going to be able to afford to go back to school on an hourly job kind of wage. So then I became a truck driver. I put everything I own into a storage unit and went for training with a company and spent 6 years over the road. I have been in every state in the country except for Alaska and Hawaii. And I don't want to go to Alaska.
That's so cool. Retail, I think customer service period is so difficult. It is so difficult. And so many people don't watch or pay mind to how they treat people in customer service industries. And it's really disheartening sometimes.
Yeah. And it's, I, for the most part, had pretty good customers experience. I worked grocery stores predominantly. And there it's helping people find stuff. The real anger usually comes out up front, and I was never up front. So
what would you say it was that ultimately drew you to being a therapist? Like, how did that come about after being on the road for 6 years?
Well, no, I knew I wanted to be a therapist. God, probably the University of New Hampshire, which is where I started with my undergrad. Back in my 20s. I was like 24, 25. And I took my first psychology class and I was just hooked. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the thing. But I had therapists of my own already, a couple of them, and enough to pull out and get clear in my head that there were some really bad therapists out there. And those therapists that were really bad seemed to share the theme that I saw of not having dealt with their shit.
Mhm.
Hadn't looked at it at all, kind of thing. And they were, like doing vicarious therapy for themselves, and totally not helpful for a client, because they weren't focused on the client. So when I took that class, and I have my own trauma history, and it's not, a little thing. It's took me a long time to do it. In fact, the point that I was in that class, I had not yet said aloud to anyone, including all the therapists I'd had, I had not said aloud what had happened to me. So I was sitting there in this class, loving this class, but also going, oh, no. I am not going to be one of those shitty therapists.
Mhm.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think all therapists wind up as therapists because we've either struggled with something ourselves, we've seen
Mhm.
other people close to us struggle,
Mhm.
and it comes from that place, I think, of wanting to be helpful in that way,
Oh, heck
through
yeah.
our
Heck
education
yeah.
and experience.
Yeah,
Um,
but it's not what's happened to us that makes us good therapists. It's how we've overcome it.
right,
And all the work we did to overcome it, to get through it, to deal with it.
right,
That's the thing that can allow our own personal traumas to be an asset.
right, right. I totally agree. And I also would piggyback on that and say I think having a variety of life experience as a therapist is invaluable.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I definitely have a plethora of understandings of the world.
Yeah, same. Um,
So,
so tell us a little more about yourself. Like, what are your hobbies, interests, TV shows you're watching, music you're listening to, pets, etc.?
oh, geez. Okay, so hobbies, stuff I like to do. I like to build things. With the best build thing I have ever done is I built a 10-foot by 12-foot shed all by myself.
Nice.
And it was both terrifying and awesome all at the same time.
Yeah.
Little side story there. I had the floor of the shed built, and it was out in the, on its foundation and all that stuff. And I needed to build the first wall, and I was just overwhelmed. It seems too much. And then a friend of mine, I'm talking to her and telling her how it's too much. And she's like, Schawn, it's just a floor stood up. I was like, duh. And I've done that already.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Started working on it the next day.
Okay, so building stuff.
Yeah, building stuff. So I have a collection of dragons, because one of those things that got me through my childhood was science fiction and fantasy. And any time where there was a dragon, preferably a dragon that was the good guy, not the dragon that was the bad guy, I was there. I was totally there. I was like totally into that. So I have a whole big collection of dragons, which I've now gotten my son involved in, which is both good and bad. I am a crime show watcher. So Criminal Minds, NCIS, all those dark and, kind of crazy people doing crazy stuff, but scripted, not actual real world. I am into.
Okay. I'm a huge true crime buff. Like I love true crime. I mean,
My
what?
wife is.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
I love true crime so much that I double majored in psychology and criminal justice because that meant I got to take classes on law and forensics. That second degree was really more of like a hobby to me than it was like I had no intention of becoming a police officer or, you know,
Yep.
what are they called? A corrections officer or a parole officer. Like those
Mm-hmm.
were never even remotely on my
Mm-hmm. Totally. It's like that piece about we do these things just because of this, like a little personal satisfaction,
Yeah.
I took two extra science classes at my undergrad in order to be able to say I have a BS in psychology rather than a BA. There's
Nice.
something about saying I have a bullshit degree in psychology that just resonates for me. And I literally took two extra science classes so I could do that.
I love that. Okay, so we've got building crime dramas.
Dragons.
You have a kid and dragons and a wife. What
So
about
actually, I have two kids and a wife, and right now a nephew living with us. But so our daughter is full grown, out in the world, doing her thing. Right now, she's back in home because hiccup in life. She needs to get back on her feet. But she
what
brought her dog
happens?
with her. And unfortunately, we already have two dogs. So we now have in this house 3 dogs and 4 cats, which is awesome, but just a little insane because now there's 5 people here.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, that's a lot of love to be had in that house.
Yeah, it is. It's a little insane at times. At times we're like, okay, I'm climbing the bedroom for total privacy to just be alone.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So also curious, you work with trauma. In the work that you do with clients, what modalities do you tend to draw upon? What are the tools in your toolbox?
Yeah, well, I lean real heavy on parts work. So parts work is, the aspects of self that are kind of less aware of us, we're less aware of, and kind of getting more aware of those parts. And I also work with EMDR.
Okay. Okay. Do people tend to seek you for one or the other or both or?
No, they tend to seek me out because they want
Trauma.
to work on their trauma.
Yeah.
I have had a few cases where someone has been sent over to me to do EMDR and then go back to their therapist.
Gotcha.
And that's been cool. I've never done that before. That was a new one for me. I was like, cool. Yeah, I'll try it. I'm open to that.
Okay. Well, how would you say your clients would describe or experience you?
Well, I think one of the things I've already noticed first is I swear a lot. So if you're a person who doesn't like swearing, move on to the next therapist because I am not your option. Yeah. I spent 6 years as a truck driver. I have that truck driver mouth. That and it just fits and works, and particularly when you're dealing with trauma, being able to really get down to the nuance of the feeling is important. And swear words help with that in ways that nothing else does.
Yeah, that's what I tell my clients when they're like, oh my gosh, can I swear in here? And I'm like, you can say whatever the fuck you want. Sometimes there's just no other better word. Like nothing has quite that connotation as a cuss word. That's totally okay. That's how you feel,
Yep. So I think the next thing they would probably say is that, and I tend to warn them about this, I'm a bit antsy in my seat. I've got really bad hips. So I move around a lot. So I tend to warn people so they don't think that I had one client before I started warning people who thought I was bored with them. And I was like, no, my hips hurt.
There's a therapeutic moment to be had within all that though too.
Oh yeah. Yep. Definitely some transference going on there. So other than that, I usually get from my clients, like I just had a termination with a client and they're like, you hold the space for me so amazingly well. I felt totally safe to dive in there. And I was like, wow, cool.
Yeah. I love getting feedback. I mean, all feedback really. Even if it's negative, like I can learn,
Yeah. I when I end with my clients, I'm like, we're having that end session. I'm always like, I want to know all the bad stuff too. If you don't feel like you can tell me, then send it in a text after you leave. Send it in an email after you leave. I want to know it.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, as a therapist, I think getting feedback, I mean, because we don't go around regularly soliciting feedback, right? is kind of something that we allow to happen when it happens. And I think sometimes like there's periods of time where I haven't gotten a lot of feedback, like, you know, and I'm not about to go around soliciting it. So when it does happen, it's nice.
Yeah, I sent out a survey to my clients the other day when I was thinking about going into working with advocate, because I want to know, you know, how important this would be to them, how useful it would be, and also because they take a huge cut out of my side of the fee.
Right.
If that, you know, that would mean my fee having to go up in a kind of exponential way. And were people open to that? Were people interested in that? If they wanted it, were they willing to pay for it? And that was really cool because I got other feedback too, because I was like, is there anything else I should be working on in my practice and stuff like that at the end? And that drew out a lot
That's
of
cool.
feedback that was pretty positive and neat.
Yeah. What was the consensus? I'm curious.
2/3 were like, oh my freaking God, yes, we'll pay extra for this.
Okay, cool.
Now, mind you, only
good to know.
half of my clients bothered to do the thing, but 2/3 of the ones who did it.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. So going into adults healing from childhood trauma, you mentioned parts work and EMDR. Tell us a little more about your approach to treating adults healing from childhood trauma.
Okay. I think the best way to kind of conceptualize this is it starts all the way back before we even have our first session. You know, one thing, because I'm so aware of how expensive therapy is and how much it is and how much the mesh with the style is important, not with just the therapist, but also how I do things. And I've also discovered that there's only so far I can move away from my default position. So what I do is I do it either by video, but I prefer in person 30-minute consultation for free. On my website, there's actually a place where people can sign up for those without even having to talk to me. If none of those times work, then we have to work something else out. But you know, I keep certain spots open to always slide people into for consults. And that first consult is a little bit about what happened to them, what brought them into therapy, but mostly about, so this is how I work. And does this sound like something you'd be interested in working with? You know, and that spiel, I mean, I'll give you the whole spiel if you want.
Well, yeah, like tell us a little bit, you know?
Yeah, so childhood trauma is this very unique thing, of that it is the meeting of too young to deal with something, but it happened, so you have to.
Right.
Those two things slam into each other, and you're in this impossible situation where the kid can't handle what just happened, whatever it was, but the kid has to handle it. And we have the most freaking amazing brains, okay? Because our brains look around and go, hey, Part, you over there, come here. I need you to hold this, and I need you to just chill out and go away for a while. You know, sometimes I'll even say, throw it in the closet, close the door, lock it, paint over it, pretend the door's not even there, put it away. And that's an amazing tool that our brains have figured out how to deal with impossible shit. But what that means is later on in life, once you're not a kid anymore, you've got to deal with this shit. Now, in order to effectively deal with this shit, I have to say, you have to go to the beach. Okay. So we've all been to the beach. Okay. And the very first place you get to when you go to the beach is the parking lot. Okay. Now, a trauma survivor has a lot of familiarity with the parking lot. That is where you can talk about it till the cows come home with absolutely no feeling. Not a bit, not a drop. Okay. Parking lot is safe. It's okay to touch it there, but we can't do much healing there. We can do some changing and understanding, but we really can't heal. Problem is that most adults who have childhood trauma, who want to heal their childhood trauma, they have the other extreme, which is the riptide. And the riptide is overwhelmed, not okay, drowning, flashbacks, fuck, I'm gonna die out there. And you cannot heal trauma out there.
Right.
Anyone who has gone to a therapist and been out in the riptide with a therapist and left feeling like they didn't get anywhere, that's because they weren't actually somewhere where they could do some work.
Right.
Problem is they need a beach. Okay. Now, unfortunately, particularly for around the trauma itself, most adults who were kids when the trauma happened, they don't have a beach. They have parking lot and riptide, and they're fucking touching. And there's nothing in between. So we have to actually start the process by building that beach. Okay? And building that beach starts with, how are you about feeling happy emotions? Can you feel when you feel happy? Does that feel safe? If you can, great. How are you about regular, everyday negative emotions, the small, non-trauma ones? Okay, and what we find is that a lot of times these kids have no idea, these adults have no idea how to feel negative emotions and sometimes even positive emotions.
Right.
So we have to walk through that first, because that is the first couple feet of a beach.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling those feelings in a way that is not overwhelming, that is not scary, feeling safe enough to feel those feelings. And then once we've got that, then we start moving to smaller, kind of not quite trauma, but kind of getting a little rougher, things. And those things, when they can get through those things in a safe way, then we're done. And at the same time, not really at the same time, but before that, we're also setting up the ability to handle flashbacks, the ability to get oneself out of overwhelming emotions. Where I do this thing where I teach my clients tools, 2 tools a day, each week, 2 tools. I give them a business card. On one side is a riptide tool, and on the other side is a emotional regulation, but not in the riptide kind of tool. And they practice those tools for the whole week. If they come in and they admit they didn't practice them, then we pause and we don't go further until they practice them. Mm-hmm. So we're building the tools so that they can handle their emotions outside of the session.
Right.
Because if I'm just steering them through how to handle the riptide in session, I'm not really fully helping them.
Right.
Then once we have a beach, then we can start looking at the trauma. And that's where the parts work and the EMDR really comes in big.
Yeah, I love parts work. I am a huge fan of that and use that in my work with clients as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so valuable.
Yeah.
My next question is, well, actually, it's 2 questions, I suppose. When talking about childhood trauma, what sorts of experiences might this include? And then the second question of this is, what are some of the differences between childhood trauma and trauma experienced as adults?
Okay. So I think we have way too narrow a definition of trauma in this country, in this system.
Totally
our
agreed.
definition of trauma is just, it's, people trying to give it very specific edges and stuff. And I tend to go the opposite direction. So when I'm talking to a client and they're saying, I'm not sure if it's trauma, or if it qualifies, I wasn't raped or I wasn't whatever.
I wasn't in the military.
Yep. My thing is, hold on, here's my definition of trauma first, or my definition of childhood trauma first. Did it happen in your childhood? Second, does it feel like time enough has passed that if it was going to heal on its own, it would have healed? And this is just an arbitrary, your own personal opinion. And 3, does it still fucking hurt?
Mm-hmm.
If those 3 things are met, then it's childhood trauma.
Yeah.
What it is doesn't matter. What actually happened doesn't matter. You know, it's not like there's actually a hierarchy of, well, you have to be above a 10 in order to qualify as trauma.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
bullshit.
That's kind of like people like worrying that they're not trans enough or gay enough, or you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I don't know, did I answer that?
Well, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about the differences like between childhood trauma and adult trauma experienced as adults, like in the ways, like, for example, it might impact somebody.
Totally. So one of the hugest differences is capacity. Okay. So a kid who experiences trauma and develops lasting trauma from it, not a kid who actually gets supported and gets taken care of and gets helped and gets better, but a kid who experiences trauma and doesn't get support around it. Oftentimes what you see is those kids are in systems that are dysfunctional beyond belief. So it's not just the trauma that happened. It's the lack of parental care and stuff like that that kept them from ever getting supported and getting the help they need, but also kept them from being safe. They didn't have the resources they needed, so they were looking elsewhere, which put them at risk.
Right.
Those kinds of things, those kind of issues. And sorry, brain's freezing for a minute. So what those do is those show up as feeling overwhelmed and thrown by emotions that regular people without trauma don't get thrown by, because they never learned how to handle it, because they had to keep on shutting it down. They had to keep on, they didn't have the support network around them that prepared them for that. Now, if they grew up in a not so great home but didn't actually develop any trauma, they probably figured out on their own some ways of dealing with the world, so that when they had adult trauma, they at least already had all their coping mechanisms in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else you want to add to that?
So I think one of the things that makes childhood trauma unique is that a lot of times what we're working with is the tools that have been in place since forever that allow that kid to grow up, that get the kid through. The tools that saved their freaking lives are now causing problems. And those tools are the very thing that usually draws them into therapy.
Right.
I'm drinking too much. I can't trust anyone, and I scream at them and I expect everybody to leave me. And those tools. So I spend a lot of time.
They're no longer serving us.
Yes. Yeah. But here's the thing. The part that's actually saying, hey, do this, doesn't know that.
Right.
It still thinks it's saving your life.
Right.
It still thinks that it's, it's do this or die. Yeah.
And we end up reacting at times and being like, that part of us becomes triggered, whenever with whatever specific trigger that triggers that,
And then that part gets overwhelmed. So in an attempt to get help, it overwhelms the whole.
Right.
But that then means that the whole is just as overwhelmed as the part.
Right.
So we're having to teach both the part and the whole how to have a better communication system, how to let each other know when, hey, I'm a part over here and that shit was not okay for me.
Right.
And so instead of overwhelming the whole, instead, getting their attention and getting them to help you, because when they're not overwhelmed, they actually can help their parts.
Right. Yeah, totally. I like to think of it kind of in terms of, in a lot of ways, it's reparenting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Yeah,
in order, go ahead.
I often tell my clients that they get to be the adults they needed.
Right. That's exactly it. Yeah. Okay. So in order to work with somebody on their trauma, the first step to that is like somebody has to recognize it as such, right? So a lot of people struggle to acknowledge their trauma or to qualify the things they've experienced as trauma. And one barrier that I've noticed through my work is just kind of people's tendency to compare their experiences to the experiences of others. Now, what are your thoughts on this, and what sorts of purposes might this unintentional denial serve?
Yeah, well, I think the unintentional denial is a way to kind of, it's a part saying, hey, it's not that bad, feel better. Hey, you
Minimizing.
know, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and hoping that that will help.
Right.
You know,
Because
actually
then
make
you
it
don't.
better.
Yeah, well, because then you don't have to experience the depth and breadth of those emotions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think also this idea of like, you know, that whole, you have to have this very tightly defined idea of what qualifies as trauma is a great disservice that we've done in this country and will be paying for years to come. I think because I aim all my advertisements and all my websites and all my Facebook pages and all that stuff towards, I lost my thought, towards adults dealing with childhood trauma. I don't tend to get the people who come in to work on anxiety and then have to be walked through getting to the point of, hey, you have trauma.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
You know, I get people who are like, I think maybe this is trauma, or fuck, yes, this is trauma.
Right. Yeah. And in working with people on trauma, laying a solid foundation is super important. What does that look like, and what would you consider to be some of the bricks of this foundation?
Okay, so first, it's those tools for handling the emotions on one's own, getting those in place, working with those. While we're doing those, we're building rapport, because quite simply, I tell clients right away, you don't have to dump your shit on me right away. Matter of fact, I'd rather you didn't, not because I don't want to hear it, but because I want to earn it. Because if you take your time and you figure out that I'm an ass and you don't want to work with me, then at least then you hadn't gone through that whole going through all that painful shit one more fucking time. You saved
Yeah.
yourself one more read through.
Right.
Okay. And just because that's our job doesn't mean we're good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a lot of kind of creating a space where I can say, you know what? I think I'm an awesome therapist, but I might not be your awesome therapist.
Right.
You know, and it's okay to figure that out. And I want to help you find that awesome therapist for you if it's not me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of thing. But I lost the question. I'm also a little flaky, which I'm always having to tell my clients.
You're doing great. The question was, what are things you consider to be some of the bricks of the foundation?
Groundwork.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, so getting solid understanding and ability to handle their emotions outside of session, inside a session, building that beach, getting these supporting tools like the secure container, so when I was trained with EMDR, I was told that don't call it a safe place, but they called it a safe place, and I can't get it out of my head now. But that chill place, that place where they can go to calm down, to be okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Getting all those tools in place also. Starting to meet parts. And a lot of times when we meet parts, it'll be around an intense issue in session. And then I'll send them home with homework of, okay, so you need to spend time with this part. You need to hang out and have fun. Trauma work doesn't happen outside of here. Trauma work happens in here, but you guys need to build a relationship. So what did you like to do when you were X years old? Mm-hmm. You know, was that Coloring, okay, you can either go buy a bunch of coloring books and actually color, or you can just go into your mind and spend some time in your mind coloring with this part.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get these really weird looks, and I'm like, see, this is why I say you should take your time and figure out if you want to work with me, because
Right.
I'm a little weird.
Well, not only that, but this work is difficult work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing in working with people on trauma is creating a space where the person is able to feel safe, right? So, what
Mm-hmm.
is your approach to creating that safe space and being a safe person for your clients?
Mm-hmm. A lot of times that starts in that first consultation, where when they start to dump out all the trauma, I'll pause them and say, I do want to hear this, but you don't know me well enough to know whether or not I can handle it. And I really don't want you to just dump it out and just be raw afterwards. I was like, I think I should have to earn the right to hear what you need to tell me, which means I want you to slow down a little bit and tell me in a session or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, if that's what you need. It's like, because I would rather you tell me when we actually have that beach, and when telling me can actually be healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know one of your other questions was about, what's the first session look like?
Mm-hmm.
My first session is going over intake paperwork, going over the ACEs scale, because that allows me to see if there's anything in other areas, going over the dissociation scale to see if autism, ADHD, and trauma all kind of look a lot alike symptom-wise.
Right.
So I have found that scale is a really great way to pull out all the symptoms that might get in the way and start to figure out which ones are what.
Mm-hmm.
Because if this is a symptom and it's from autism, then cool. I need a whole different set of ways of handling that symptom than I would need if that symptom was from trauma.
Right. Right. That makes a
So
lot of sense.
those two pieces end up being a really great way for me to slow down the process, that, and to make connections, but not jump in so deep, which gives me information, gives them information from my side, because we end up getting pieces of the story without getting the whole story. We get the edges, and they get to see how I react and respond to that,
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing is critical to them figuring out if I'm the one who should have this info.
Yeah.
If I could help them.
Yeah. And building that beach.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Which I love that metaphor, by the way.
Thanks.
So, needless to say, childhood trauma can negatively impact us as adults in a variety of ways, right? So, my question is, what are some of the ways that you commonly see childhood trauma continuing to impact individuals as adults?
Yeah. Yeah. So really obvious ones, addictions.
Mm-hmm.
Addictions. I am not an addictions therapist. I don't have an LCDC. That's not what I do. But I find that addictions and trauma, particularly childhood trauma, go hand in hand. Because as a little kid, 12-year-old, 10-year-old, whatever age you were, you didn't have access to the resources you need, but maybe you had alcohol. Or maybe you had meth, or whatever the heck you had, and that got you through. One of the things I'm always telling my clients is that these are tools that saved your life.
Right.
So you can't just take a shovel and pick them out and toss them out of the curb. We need to first appreciate what they did.
I like to frame them as adaptive coping strategies that no longer work for us where we are now.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So addictions is a really big one. Relationship and connection issues. So lack of trust in others, diving in with trust too soon and getting hurt over and over again. say, having really, really big reactions to small things.
Uh-huh.
And you remember that emotional cup kind of idea?
Yeah, yeah.
So I like to tell my clients, if your emotional cup has 4 rocks in it, and then regular life keeps you filled up to an 8 because regular life has a 4, but you've got rocks in there. So it goes all the way up to the 8.
Right.
Anytime you put anything in there, you're going to overflow.
Mm-hmm.
And those rocks are your trauma.
I like that. Anything else you commonly see?
I think that's pretty common, pretty much relationships, reactions, emotional reactions,
Boundaries.
oh God, yes, boundaries, both
It's a big one.
both extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, one of the things that I'm telling clients all the time is I don't believe in battering rams, which sounds really weird, but a lot of my session today is my interview today has sounded really weird. Let me explain. Because childhood trauma is all about loss of boundaries, disrespect of boundaries, not even knowing you had the right to have boundaries.
Right.
We must respect all parts boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're trying to do some work and we walk in and we're like, okay, we're going to work on trauma X today, and a part stands up and goes, no, we're not.
Mm-hmm.
We stop. We stop and we work with that part until that part says we can.
Mm-hmm.
Because that part is just as valid as all the rest of it, and it needs its boundaries also respected.
Yeah. Consent too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you don't know how often clients want to just push their way through that resistant part. They want to let's just go do it. I'm like, nope. There's
Mm-hmm.
can't remember her name. I did a consult one time around DID, and she said, the slower you go, the faster you get there. And I'm like, yep. The more you slow down and work with these parts that are in the way, the faster you actually get through all the trauma, because you're just going to make more of a mess if you force your way through.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Now, I feel like trauma is one of those invisible things that a lot of people struggle with. And on the surface, other people would never suspect that somebody is struggling. I think a part of this is related to some of the more quote unquote socially acceptable ways that trauma can impact people, such as things like overworking, hyperindependence, people pleasing, and perfectionism, which unfortunately are often positively reinforced by our society, especially a capitalistic society, right? So, what are your thoughts on this? How do you address this with clients? And what do you think is important to communicate to our listeners out there who may be struggling with feeling their struggles are invisible in some way?
Yeah. A lot of the tools and coping mechanisms that we figure out, we adapt to our adult lives. We figure out how to work. My thing was work. I worked a ton. I worked a million hours. I could work really, really, really well. I had no idea how to play until I was in my late 30s. No idea what fun meant, So yeah, totally get that society rewards us for doing these things which are shooting us in the foot.
Right.
And at some point, you've got to decide, I don't think I want to do this anymore. There's got to be more. Or I don't want to. What about me? And those questions, those voices are also valid. And you know what? You don't have to stop just because you have questions. You can keep on working that 60, 80-hour week and come to therapy. And you can decide to stop working in a year, in a 2, in 3, or never. It doesn't require you to, those tools that we used that are now hurting us, that are hiding our pain. We get to keep them. Just because we pick other tools doesn't mean we don't still have those tools. Doesn't mean we don't still have those resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is there anything else I haven't asked about adults healing from childhood trauma that you feel is important to say before we get back to some more questions about you?
I guess the last thing I really would want to put in there is this idea that people often are like, with childhood trauma, I can't deal with that. I can't touch it.
Mhm.
It will kill me. It will destroy me, you know? And that is the emotion of the moment it happened, being echoed into your current life.
Being traumatized.
Mm-hmm. But it's also not actually the truth.
Right.
Not anymore. Because you did the one thing, the hardest thing already. And that is you survived your trauma. This feels like it's going to be harder. But it's not. It's going to be hard, but it's not going to be harder.
Well, I think one thing that people kind of fear in general when it comes to pretty much anything is this just kind of fear of the unknown, like fear of what things would be like if they were different.
Who will
and
I
not
be
knowing
without
that.
it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. Usually about a third of the way into the trauma work comes up this whole idea of who am I without my trauma? Fuck. I don't know if I want to be a whole new person, you know?
And
And the
change
thing
is
is that,
scary.
yeah, but also we've always thought the trauma was who we were,
Mhm.
you know, because that was the big, huge axe that was swinging around, scaring the shit out of us.
Right.
But actually, we were never that. We were always how we dealt with it. And that ain't going anywhere.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this information on adults healing from childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Switching gears a bit and going back to you as a therapist, what kind of experience do you have working with particularly vulnerable clients, such as those who are transgender, undocumented, or BIPOC, to name a few examples?
So, yeah, totally. I do not know if I've worked with undocumented clients. I don't ever ask for documents. I do know that I have at least one client who is using a fake name. If you don't use insurance, there's no reason why you have to tell me your name. You can tell me whatever name you want. Doesn't matter to me. So I know, you know, that way in that means. But I've worked with people of different races, different ethnicities. I have a bit of a lisp. Or
that's a hard word.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Different ethnicities, different gender identities. I was actually kind of surprised with the frequency with which I end up having trans clients. I think it's because all my pictures on my website have me in a shirt and tie, which I think I look dashing in. But
nice.
I had never put that out as my field of area. So having gotten that as a kind of clientele group that has shown up on my doorstep has been interesting.
Well, I mean, I think all therapists need to know how to work with trans clients and the particular particular stressors and situations that trans and gender diverse people experience, because, you know, trans people have a suicide attempt rate of 41%. We can't even begin to gather statistics on completion rates because that's so complicated because of the ways, you know, gender may be documented, for example. And so it's important. 41% is extremely high. And there are a lot of societal factors that impact, I think, a lot of trans people seeking support through therapy. And I'm just really glad for that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree that every therapist needs to be able to work with everybody. But I think sometimes from the other side, there's I want to see myself in my therapist. And that is perfectly valid. You know, I often say when I'm looking for a therapist, I was looking for a couples therapist the other day, and I was like, we were like, okay, so we're queer, but that's not the problem.
Right.
And
Right.
whatever person you think will work well with us needs to understand that that's not the problem.
Right. Right. And I think that that's also an assumption that a lot of therapists make, that, you know, somebody who is trans is seeking therapy because they're trans. And oftentimes that's not even the case in a lot of situations.
Yeah. Yeah. And being able to put it aside, but also bring it back in when it actually might be attached to the problem.
Right. Like in terms of like macro systems, you know?
And being able to just to put it, you know, to bring it up as an option and be totally accepting of the individual saying, that's so, isn't it? And be like, okay, cool. Or, hey, have you thought of? And then going, oh yeah, that fuck that again.
I had a client give me some of the best feedback that I've ever gotten last night at the end of a session. My client said, I find myself doing the things you've taught me and I find it annoyingly helpful. That's the best feedback I've ever gotten. I just appreciate that on so many levels.
Yeah. I've got this one client who I think swears at me whenever I've really hit the nail on the head. And I'm like, yep, got it.
Yeah, that was followed by, damn it, Noah, why are you so effective at your job?
Yeah. But at the same time, it's so good to hear that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So in thinking about, and I love this question, I think it's super interesting. And Amanda and I talked a little bit about it on last week's episode, like in terms of her perceptions of being on the client end of that. So are you a therapist who will laugh or cry with your clients? And when I'm saying crying, I don't mean like absolutely bawling, just like shedding a tear or two, you know?
So laughter is a huge part of trauma work, period, in my opinion. First of all, I used laughter growing up to manage the emotional intensity of the room. You know, that kid who's always reading the room and trying to make sure everybody's okay. And one of the things I had to do was, when I started working to become a therapist, was learn to put that use of it aside, but keep that thing of, we can use it to manage the intensity of the room, but we're not trying to get it back to okay. We're just trying to get it back to within a workable limit.
Right.
You know, so the humor is still a big part of that, you know, kind of that kind of thing. So humor comes in. My wife, I'm working from home and I have a noise machine outside my room. So my wife can't actually hear what's being said. But she said the one thing that she found really, really surprising once she started being in the house while I was doing therapy with clients was how often I laugh.
That's so funny. I recently moved in with a roommate, and that's exactly what he told me. I have a sound machine outside my door, and he was like, I can't ever hear anything except laughing. You laugh a lot. I was like, yeah, I guess so. So that's interesting you say that.
Yeah. And I think it's great because sometimes when you get something moved, it's good to laugh about the difference, you know, laugh about the change, laugh about, oh my God, this is dark, you know, all of it.
How
And
about
I have occasionally cried. It's been more of a caught a tear kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's always been around clients moving something really fucking huge and just being in awe of that.
That's the same case for me. You know, there's just really touching and like healing and just like moments of emotion sometimes that are difficult to describe because sometimes it's just very abstract. So earlier you talked about holding space. How would you define holding space for someone?
I think sorry, I'm laughing because I literally had a client one time who had me sitting in silence for 15 minutes, and I actually timed it. And it was actually 15 minutes. So part of that is the use of silence, allowing them the room to pull their thoughts together and think about these things. But first, before that can ever happen, it's the encouraging to slow down and to choose whether or not to share. It's the encouraging to allow them to get a feel for me. You know, it's those kind of things. It's creating a room that feels safe. It's creating a space that feels safe. It's creating, you know, it's all those layers. Like my office is like, my actual office is like very busy. Sorry, I think it thinks I just raised my hand. My office is really busy, but it's really comfortable too. You know, and there's fidget toys everywhere and there's stuff like that. But, and then it's accepting their truth, not judging it or jumping on it or being curious in a weird way about it, but just hearing them.
People's stories are sacred, and I'm always honored to be in that with those people, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. I like that definition. What about the best advice you've ever received from a supervisor or anyone for that matter?
It wasn't actually a supervisor. It was a lady who had who was further ahead than me. I was a student in school and she was out in the field running her own practice, that kind of thing. And I was talking about feeling like I was flying by the seat of my pants, kind of thing. And she's like, Schawn, it's not flying by the seat of your pants. It's that you are synthesizing and putting together all of the information that you have gathered, both out of school and in school, and you are putting it together in a new way, and that new way is what's working for you. So it was a real boost to trust, to learn to trust my gut, to learn that flying by a seat of the pants is actually a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I never enter a session with like some sort of preconceived notion or agenda. You know, I think it's so important as a therapist to be able to do that, because you don't know what's going to happen that day in that session.
Yeah, I'll glance back at the last session, but I'm not doing it to know where I have to go next. It's just a reference point.
Right. Okay. What have you personally learned about yourself and or the world through your practice?
You know, I guess a small part of me was worried that focusing my practice on trauma would burn me out. I would, 2-3 years from now, be sitting, in some agency doing shit ass work, tired, kind of thing. And what I've discovered from sitting in the room and helping people and doing that thing is I hold it differently. Because when I see these clients, I don't see the trauma.
Right.
I see that they're here trying, which means they already are here. They're already present. So I'm already in awe of having gotten through that, whatever that is. And then I'm just like, I want you to be amazed by yourself too, because Jesus Christ, you're amazing. And that allows me to sit with a great deal of really insanely intense stuff and come home. Now, my wife will tell you that when I come home, the first thing that happens is I spend about an hour to 2 hours with my brain just turned off. It's just done. There's no, I'm like, blah, 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 blah. I'm useless. But once that passes, because I've just been so focused, once that passes, I'm good. I want to be with my family. I want to have fun. I want to, relax and that kind of thing.
What do you do to take care of yourself?
Oh gosh. So well, family, 4 cats, 2 dogs, well, 3 dogs right now, but um, I like to go for walks with my wife in the parks around here. We have our daughter is out in the world doing her thing, back temporarily, but mainstream. But our son is special needs. I like to say that we don't ever have to let him go. We get to keep him forever.
Mhm.
So we you know, he does play like as that 2 or 3-year-old kind of thing, and that can be a really fun thing to lean into.
Yeah,
You know.
I could see that for sure. Yeah, just I mean just even the innocence of that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of a sudden out of the blue, he starts handing me like, things that he wants me to hold as he stacks them higher and higher and higher and higher and higher on my hand. And as soon as they fall, he wants to start again. Just stacks them higher.
That's a fun game. I think I would have a hard time staying still enough for something like that.
As long as I can still get one hand for the phone, I can stay with him forever on
That's
that
true.
one.
There you go. There you go.
Although if I had to use both hands, then I'd be bored and doing it. But if I could actually fully engage or at least half engage, I'd be all in. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the next question is one of my other favorite questions. How would you define happiness?
Oh God. So a lot of clients will tell me, I just want to be happy. And I'm always telling them, then stop aiming for happiness. Start doing things that you might be fun, that you might feel like you did a good thing. Start working towards goals, because happiness is a side effect of whatever those wonderful goals are that are personally satisfying. So it's like happiness is that side, the extra sauce that comes from doing what you love.
Mhm. I
It's
like that.
it comes from stepping back and looking at the damn shed that I just built, which I actually built a little half-assed one to put the mower in.
That's
Um,
handy.
yeah, and I was just so freaking tickled pink with it afterwards. I'm standing there going, "It's that." Yes, I am that cheesy.
Hey, everybody needs a little bit of cheesy. I've been known to tell lots of bad dad jokes, apparently. So, so I hear you.
Yeah.
Next questions are a little vulnerable, although you kind of answered one of them before. First one is, what is the most embarrassing moment you've had as a clinician to date?
I was reading this question when you sent me the questions, and I was like, "Oh shit!" All right, so it has to be an embarrassing question that doesn't reveal anything about a client. And that was, I was thinking, oh my God, I got to find the right way but then I went and did something stupid today. So, hey, I've got a brand new story for you.
Well, tell
So,
us.
yes. So today I was up front in the front of the house in the kitchen wrapping Christmas presents. And, people send texts and reach out to you. And I got a text from a client, hey, you got an earlier time for my appointment tomorrow. And I stop and I look and I'm like, let me figure out that. And yep, got that all moved around. No problem. Went back to wrapping my presents. I got all the presents for my wife wrapped and I had them stacked in this really cool stack. And I took a picture of them and I sent them and I said, got your presents wrapped. And my wife gets home an hour later and she's like, you didn't send me no picture. Yeah, I sent it to my client.
That's hilarious. That is a good one. That's a really good one. I think that's maybe my favorite one yet.
Yep.
So what'd you do?
I sent a really quick message. Oh my fucking God, I'm sorry. That goes to my wife. And they sent back, no problem.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So the next vulnerable question is, are you in therapy or have you ever been in therapy?
Oh my God, yes. I've been in, oh God, more than I can name. Starting when I was 16, still living at home, went to a state agency kind of place, on and off again, all the way through even while I was truck driving, I was seeing a lady by phone. So yeah, right this moment, I am not. I'm between therapists, but definitely looking to post-Christmas, once the finances rebalance, get back into therapy again. Not because there's crisis going on, but just because I still have to do my work.
Yep.
And some of it has to do with being a therapist with a trauma history, working with trauma. And some of it has to do just with my own damn trauma.
Yep.
Sorry, folks. It's never 100% done.
Yeah, I think, one thing I talk with my clients about regarding trauma is that unfortunately, like there's no like magic Men in Black thing that erases your brain, and it's the sort of thing that is managed. And so I like to set up that kind of more realistic expectation.
Mm-hmm. The military was working on something like that, trying to figure out how to keep memories from recording post. They go out in the field, they come back, they take a pill, they don't remember it. But I was just like, yeah, but it's not just written in the cortex.
Right,
it's also written in the limbic system and in the body. And that stuff will then stay there. And how the fuck do you process stuff that has been literally erased, but it's still there?
Yeah, I'm sure the government probably hasn't shared their final dossiers on that, I would imagine.
Well, usually the most trouble we ever get into as a society is around trying to find a quick fix for a really big problem.
That is true. Can think of many examples within the pandemic alone.
Yep.
Well, Schawn, is there anything else you think would be good for a potential client or other therapists to know about you or your practice?
Whew. I think you've asked a lot of questions. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
It has. It's been fun. I had a blast. I hope I haven't set a new record for the length of chattering.
Well, how do you feel about everything?
Good. I feel good about it. I don't think anything came out that I'm not okay with people having.
Okay. Anything, I mean, Amanda will do like some edits to like to shape the edges, to make the edges a little curvier, but everything that you've said you're okay with and don't need anything like edited out in its entirety or anything like that.
Okay, so I'm a trauma survivor and I have ADHD, which means I literally don't remember most of the interview already.
You and me both.
It's like it's already done. It's already done. At some point, probably my wife will listen to it and go, "You said that." But other than that, no.
Well, think about it. I'm going to give you till noon tomorrow anyway.
Alrighty.
That way, it has a little bit of time to like simmer.
All right. Sounds like a good idea.
Any questions about moving forward with this or anything else related to the podcast or anything at all?
I'm good. This has been a blast. Hey, do you have are you still looking for people to interview?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to send a friend of mine, Lynn, over to you guys.
Yeah, please do.
I went to the class cycle with her. She specializes predominantly in people on the spectrum, heavily also in relationships. So one person on the couple is on the spectrum, one person is not.
Yeah, I'd love to have her on the show. I'm actually looking to expand the podcast to like Texas as a whole. So if you know of any therapists in Texas that might be interested, feel free to send them info on the podcast and give them my info to contact me.
Okay, will do.
Cool. Well, I will email you once everything is posted. If you think of something to be edited, just send me an email tomorrow by noon. If I don't hear from you, then I'll just assume that everything's okay. And if you have any questions come up, I mean, anything at all, just holler at me.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Schawn. I'm glad we finally got to meet. Switch my words
Me
around.
too. Yeah.
Well, enjoy
Me
your
too.
weekend.
Thank you. I
Bye.
will. Bye.